Okay, so our question is government a good or an evil?
So I'm Heather.
I'm Mackenzie.
And I'm Haley.
So our first slide here is referring to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It's an old Gothic novel about the unpredictable dual nature of people, and we think that that is a good popular culture reference to how government is as well.
So our question again is government a good or an evil? This question gets us as a group to think about what life would be like without having government and seeing the different viewpoints of all the different philosophers we covered in class. It's a good discussion question for this class and the readings we went over in this class, because each of the different philosophers have a different viewpoint on if government is good or if it's evil.
And as a class, we thought about how the government benefits us and doesn't benefit us. And we also thought about how flexible government can be.
So some of the controversies that we think that this question relates to is grounded in the very nature of the question itself. Is government a good or evil? Because in countries such as China or North Korea, communist countries, this question could get people killed, beheaded, any number of torture, just asking that question, because the answer, there is no question. The government is good. If you are under a dictatorship and you should be submissive to your government in those forms of government. So we think it's actually a privilege for us to be able to answer this question and to even be able to ask it, right? So our first philosopher is good old Plato. He thought that government is that he thought government was sort of like this loose cannon that sort of tilts towards tyranny. I think that this is a good representation of his philosophy, because he thought that government tended to cater to excessive freedoms, and he thought that that lent itself to an instability and tyranny. So whether he thought it was good or whether he thought it was bad, he just thought that it was something that was really had no guarantees, and that was something that he thought was a major fault in government. So democracy specifically was a danger due to its excessive allowances freedom. Obviously, he talks about oligarchies or aristocracies, which he thinks is the best. So he absolutely would favor security over freedom. The attractive and tempting quality of government is actually what Plato faults government for, which is why he thought that the most viable government would be one that was ruled by just philosopher kings. He wasn't interested in these. He thought that it was almost like a mockery. Like the election process was just like, okay, this is just about cutthroat popularity contests. This isn't actually about determining who the best ruler should be. So the question for him is, not specifically, but is there a guarantee that the most ardent just officials will be in charge? So that lack of guarantee is sort of what is, again, a major flaw in government. And we think that the caveat is something that Plato most famously said, was that the only thing that he knows is that he knows nothing. So his tendency to answer questions with leading to more questions sort of left an open-ended rubric for how he processed the world around him. So if he was still alive now, there would be a chance that we would be able to convince him that to alter his opinion to some degree. He probably would still think that people are excessive, which is true, but so that's the gist of what he would think.
So Hobbes, for Hobbes, society cannot exist without government, and without a lawful society, lawlessness ensues, and we all will kill each other. And the visual that we have on this page is the Purge. If you haven't seen the Purge, it's basically a day where the government gives up all their rights and everyone in the society can do whatever they want. And throughout the movie, people are constantly just going after each other, killing each other. Just
Revenge.
this basically just describes how Hobbes thinks. It's basically that if there is no government, then the society is not going to remain intact.
It's gonna degenerate, and yeah. We all can get revenge on any of our enemies or anyone that that looks at us. The Karen in the Starbucks that looks at you the wrong way, you can you can end her.
Mm-hmm.
And you won't get fired. No, no repercussions.
Right. So what would Thomas Hobbes think? In such condition, there is no place for industry, because the fruit thereof is uncertain. No account of time, no arts, no letters, no society, and which is worst of all, continual fear and danger of violent death. And the life of man, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. That was on page 293. In short, he thinks that government is the glue keeping the society intact, and without it, there is no code by which we can use to guide all of our actions. He says that it might not be good, but it is a necessary evil. Some questions just, how would he define good? Simply not bad, or can there be progress beyond not killing each other?
What do you guys think he would think?
I think that he defines government as he said that it's the glue that keeps our society together, and without it, there's no code and people can do whatever they want. I think he thinks that government is good, because without it, there would be evil.
Yeah.
I think that we can have progress, obviously, from what he's saying when he says no account of time, no arts, no letters of society. So obviously we have, because of a specific, because we know specifically, okay, if you do this crime, this is the punishment. If there's justice, that hopefully will create order. And then once we get beyond that, then we can do what humans tend to do, which is communicate, create art, have universities, have public works, have institutions. So the fact that we even have any of these things, obviously, to even right now to be discussing how we even got to this point, is, I think, a proof that progress can be made beyond not killing each other. And that is because we decided that we need to have some sort of structure so that it's not just, okay, this person can do this, and then, there needs to be, which I mean, still now, I guess there's still injustice, but
yeah,
we still have been able to not just guillotine women because they cannot produce a child for the whatever king.
right.
So definitely.
And Locke thinks government is essential because it budgets for the capacity of individuals to consent how society is organized. The circumstances by which authority is gained prove if a government is legitimate. So Locke is he's the most similar to how our government works now. We vote for things. We live in a democracy, but yeah.
Yeah. And this is an interesting picture too.
Yeah.
Of like, if the people move, then that guy, at the podium, he just falls.
Mm-hmm.
So.
What would Locke think? For if the consent of the majority shall not in reason be received as the act of the whole, and conclude every individual, nothing but the consent of every individual can make anything to be the act of the whole. Consent or agreement allows progress to be had, so if everyone agrees on something, we can move forward and go with that. The flexibility and free market of ideas afforded by the iterations of government act as litmus tests or examples for how humans might configure themselves. Without the consent of the government, a government is illegitimate. So the people have to agree with the government for it to work and be good for the people.
Yeah, definitely. I think the concept of consent itself is something that is specifically language that exists within something that has to do with a contract, something that's an agreement. And I think that is unique, because once we've started to create these social contracts and have these agreements and have this consent, then there's almost like this precedent that we can use as a framework for how we might be able to structure ourselves in different ways, which society has done throughout history. We've had, monarchs with kings and queens. We've had obviously representative democracy, and we have uh, less liberty in certain governments, communist countries. So I think the idea of consent, that it doesn't work unless again it says nothing but the consent of every individual can make anything to be the act of the whole. So everyone, the action of one hopefully should be in agreement with what the wishes of everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
So for Smith, this isn't a direct quote or anything, obviously, but sort of how we think that he would, if he spoke today, how he would say it. Damn the government. It better not meddle in our entrepreneurial enterprises. It should be a hedge of protection for us so we can let the market do its thing. So we kind of thought that cruise control was a good metaphor for how he perceived it. Just let the market just cruise and do what it's supposed to do, and the government should be as small and as, less interference, the better for him. So according to the system of natural liberty, the sovereign has only 3 duties to attend to. First, the duty of protecting the society from violence and invasion of other independent societies. Secondly, the duty of establishing an exact administration of justice. And thirdly, the duty of erecting and maintaining certain public works and certain public institutions. The profit could never repay the expense to any individual or small number of individuals, though it may frequently do much more than repay it to a great society. For Smith, the government should not interfere with like free trade, so like laissez-faire. That's a very old concept. So I thought when I saw that the government has only 3 duties, like 3 duties does not seem like a whole lot to me. That just, again, he wants it to me as small as possible, simply just a peripheral means to facilitate the entrepreneurial spirit and the transaction of capitalists. So what do you guys think he means when he says the profit could never repay the expense to any individual or small number of individuals when he talks in that one section there? What do you think he's like referring to?
I don't know.
Because it seems like he's talking about, because before that he's talking about certain public works and certain public institutions. So I think he's showing us like potentially maybe the social assets. Like he's almost talking like he's not even a capitalist. He's saying that the things that are created, the public works, the arts, the whatever, all the stuff that people do as entrepreneurs is going to have a profit beyond anything that we could ever repay.
Mm-hmm.
Something that's not like tangible.
Okay.
So yeah, he definitely thought the government should be small, and then the government's good if it's letting trade happen, if it's letting profit happen, if it's letting all that free trade happen, then government's good.
So for Wollstonecraft, government is male, the constituency is male and female, thus government is incomplete and not truly representative. The image is, I don't even know, who is that again?
I think is it James Brown? I think that's what
That's what it looks
Yeah,
like.
so
Yeah.
he basically says, this is a man's world, this is a man's world, but it wouldn't be nothing without a woman or a girl. Wollstonecraft also wrote the Vindication of the Rights of Women in 1792, which was a riff-off over the Thomas Paine's The Rights of Man in 1971, which is kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. We also think that this the conversation we're having now, this wouldn't be possible without a woman, because all of us are women.
Yeah.
Yeah. What would Wollstonecraft think? It is not that government, then, very defective and very unmindful of the happiness of one half of its members, that does not provide for honest, independent women by encouraging them to fill respectable situations. While it might be true of women in the 18th century, they did not have interest in law or government. How could the proclivity be infused in the playground of restrictiveness? And another quote, but in order to render their private virtue a public benefit, they must have a civil existence in the state, married or single, else we shall continually see some worthy women who sensibly have been rendered painfully acute by undeserved contempt, droop like the lily broken down by a plowshare.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely the second question, I added that question because I thought that, if these arguments were brought forth at that time, which obviously was very dangerous for like a woman at that time to be bringing up a lot of the issues that she brought up in the late 1700s.
Yeah.
Something that might have been argued is just like, well, women aren't interested in talking politics or being involved in the government, or they don't really want rights. They're not really interested. They're more interested in like the fairer things of life. But how could the interest be infused in these women if they never had women that they saw do those sort of things?
Mm-hmm.
And hold those positions and those stations? So this is almost reverting back to what Smith was saying about that we would never be able to repay the value of the enterprises we have and the great society that we have. In the same way, a lot of women simply being able to hold respectable stations, whether or not they were really seen a lot, but being able to hold those respectable stations and contribute whatever they had was almost like an immense value, because then it opened up the opportunity for other women to say that if they wanted to fill those stations, that they could even think about it or even be able to study it.
Right.
And have the law protect them, because how are they supposed to acquire property or acquire the means by which they can even begin to do that if they don't have, let's say if a woman's a piano player, if she doesn't have any money to herself, she has to go ask her husband, and then she can't go play it, and maybe she can use that in the opera. I don't know, like
Right.
she can't even afford it, and she's already nothing.
And there's Mill. Government is good if it does what we want it to, but the wants of the people change as often as the people. And the value is in the consequence of governmental actions, not the intentions. So,
yeah, definitely, like it's going to change as often, like the people changing,
yeah.
the freedom of expression, what we want to express, what we expressed 100 years ago versus 100 years from now is going to, change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What would Mill think? Elective and responsible government became subject to the observations and criticisms which wait upon a great existing fact. It was now perceived that such phrases as self-government and the power of the people over themselves do not express the true state of the case, and the self-government spoken of is not the government of each by himself, but of each by all the rest. And that's on page 635. And another quote is, the only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others. And that's on the same page. And basically saying that the main purpose of the government should be to protect the people from harm. And was like a big main point for him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like, I think something that's also interesting is, like, at least for me personally, as like growing up, like being an adolescent, I would always say, like, well, it's my life, it's not affecting anyone else. I can go blast this music really loud, it doesn't matter, it's my life, I'm not, and I think
Yeah.
that's sort of on a micro level that's relating to what he's saying, because he's saying that, like, anything you do is still in some aspect going to affect other people's lives. So that's why you put your headphones on, do not be annoying, and don't be disruptive to other people's liberties.
Mm-hmm.
So up next we have Marx. So something that he thought was people in the government have different interests, which raise conflict with those of the working class. So Marx was writing obviously during the Industrial Revolution, hence why we have the chimney sweepers here. He definitely thought that government was definitely implicated in the exploitation of the working class, because the government could pass specific laws that said children cannot work, people need to be paid specific, be able to unionize, be able to get better wages. And he just thinks that it's a continual conversation about, again, here's a quote from Marx: it has, the bourgeoisie, centralized means of production and has concentrated property in a few hands. The necessary consequence of this was political centralization. Independent or but loosely connected provinces with separate interests, laws, governments, and systems of taxation became lumped together into one nation with one government, one code of laws, one national class interest, one frontier, and one customs tariff. So something already in that I underlined here is the necessary consequence of this was political centralization. So when every material thing becomes concentrated into a few hands, that means any of the politics is going to cater toward the interest of keeping those material possessions within a specific, very small group of hands, so that those people can continue to accumulate wealth. So obviously you're not getting the perspective of the working class man. He's not the one that's in office. So owing to the extensive use of machinery and to the division of labor, the work of the proletarians has lost all individual character and consequently all charm for the workmen. So again, when everything's centralized, when it's almost like this shorthand of like, okay, this is going to be what it is for everyone. No individual say. You're just a cog in the machine. You're just here to do whatever. Obviously renders the working man invisible. And another interesting point is the division of labor. That's something that we learned about with Plato. He talked about that the division of labor is the easiest way for us to be able to have progress in society, because what's easier, one person doing 5 different tasks or one person mastering one? So it's better to master one, but also if you're mastering one, then someone's going to own your labor and you're going to be alienated from it. So that's something that's almost, it's how we have to be productive, but how do we make it to where it's not exploiting, we have these essential workers. How do we make sure we protect them? Those are all questions that we'll probably continue to ask, which is why this question, is government good or bad, is still relevant, because we're going to continue to ask it.
Mhm. So for Hospers, he had the three things of libertarianism. No one is anyone else's master, and no one is anyone else's slave. Other men's lives are not yours to dispose of, and no human being should be a non-voluntary mortgage on the life of another. He also said government has also always been the chief enemy of the right of property. The officials of government, wishing to increase their power and finding an increase of wealth, an effective way to bring this about, seize some or all of what a person has earned. And since government has a monopoly of physical force within the geographical area of the nation, it has the power but not the right to do this. That was on page 44.
Yep, definitely libertarian perspective.
Yeah.
Right.
That, again, it goes back with, what we wrote about if someone kills another person, should we be obligated to step in? And his
Yeah.
answer would be, we have to stay out of that.
Mhm.
It's a moral obligation, but the government shouldn't be involved.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or in class, sorry, can you go back?
Oh yeah, no, you're good.
Or in class, I remember Jack used the Seinfeld reference. I don't know if you guys ever watched Seinfeld, but at the end of that season, at the end of the whole show, they got sent to jail just because they didn't help someone when they were getting robbed, or I think their car was getting stolen or something like that.
Yeah.
And then they got sent to jail, and that was how the show ended. So that kind of yeah.
Very interesting. Mm-hmm.
And then Mills, he thought government is ruled by a racial contract that has systematically brought white supremacy into politics and society. And a current controversy of this is Ahmaud Arbery. He was shot while jogging by two white men. I don't know if they're officers, but
yeah, that I might have to fact check that.
Yeah. But yeah, two white men, and it took 74 days for an arrest to be made. And that was only after this video, a video of it happening came out. So it's kind of sad that that's what it takes for a person of color, to get justice.
Mm-hmm.
So. What would Mills think? He thinks that our government was built on a racist structure, as he put in the racial contract. He thinks that government needs to change, and okay, this is just a quote that included government, any society, government, and legal system that are established should be based on that moral code, and that's basically the code that people have been following unwillingly or
Mm-hmm.
unconsciously for their whole lives, kind of, which is
Mm-hmm.
the racial code and what he wrote about.
Yeah, so definitely, I think Mills is showing us that, kind of going back to the whole Jekyll and Hyde thing. It's not like government is oh, it's so easy to go from good to bad. It has to be a big shift that we have in conversation in order for us to have that sort of progress. It's a structure. It's not something that can easily be changed. Can easily be changed, then it would already, we would have progress much sooner. So
yeah.
So for Young, she actually doesn't really give a concrete yes or no. Government is the tool that allows, or at minimum does not attempt to circumvent oppression. Oppression is historically observable in systems of government. So she definitely doesn't have a focus specifically on she mentions the word government one time. So we have this picture here of Cher culturally appropriating Native American regalia, which to some people, okay, that she just a creative thing, but again, I guess it sort of goes back to white supremacy as well. But she's clearly a very rich, wealthy woman, and that's an exploitation of the customs of a specific marginalized group of people, and she's also making a profit off of it. If she wasn't making a profit off of it, it would still be offensive, but it's just furthering the marginalization of Native Americans. Young mentions government, yeah, exactly, one time in Five Faces of Oppression. She's mostly concerned with societal and historical patterns of oppression. So, marginalized, the exploited, the violence, some things that are obvious but also less obvious. One of the reasons that many people would not use the term oppression to describe our society is that they do not understand the term in the same way as do radicals. In its traditional usage, which most people retain, oppression means the exercise of tyranny by a ruling group. So something that she definitely mentions is that there doesn't need to be an active oppressor. It just there's a group that's privileged, and then there's a group that's not privileged. There's are marginalized. There's they're feeling like they're useless. They're bored. People that are subject to violence and are targeted with violence and don't have the security or the protection to get away from those situations. And it's just a pattern that's ingrained in our culture. She doesn't say that government's good or bad. She kind of skirts around it a little bit.
So for our observations, some of the philosophers were very direct and thought that the government was either good or bad, while others were more indirect, and we often had to infer what the philosopher thought about it. They did not outright indict the government innocent or guilty.
An example would be Hobbes was very direct in his thoughts of government. Young wasn't as clear on her thoughts about government. She wasn't focused on theories of government, just more, not how government should be, but how government not theories of government, but how the situation is, how society has played the game.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of them, I think a lot of them, they write to just let people be aware, and they want people to decide for themselves if they think the government is good or bad.
Definitely. Not necessarily prescribing what we should do, but just laying out facts.
And we worked on this assignment through Zoom and communicated through group message for when we wanted to meet.
So again, I'm Mackenzie.
I'm Heather.
Okay.
Alrighty, well, we enjoyed getting this done and discussing government. Sometimes it's Jekyll, sometimes it's Hyde. Hopefully, the transformation, great God, can it be? I don't know. The future holds in 2020 with this virus.